I am Bayezid, the man later called the Thunderbolt. But in my final days, the thunder did not fall upon my enemies. It settled inside my chest. I had frightened Balkan princes, broken a crusading army at Nicopolis, and pressed Constantinople until its old walls seemed to breathe in fear. Yet history also remembers another image of me, an Ottoman sultan defeated by Timur, captured, carried into an enemy camp, and dead in captivity. They said I was fast as lightning, but lightning, too, can meet a storm larger than itself. I was not born as the name you remember. I was born into a state that had not yet become an empire, a frontier power still young, hungry, and dangerous. The lands of the Ottomans were growing, but growth was never peaceful. Every mile demanded riders, marriages, oaths, and blood. My father, Murad, gave me no soft inheritance. He gave me a life shaped by war. Around us stood many enemies, not one. Balkan lords, Byzantine emperors, Anatolian beys, ambitious courtiers, and soldiers waiting for strength. A prince in such a world does not learn comfort first. He learns how quickly loyalty can change its direction. He learns that a throne is not a chair. It is a point where many knives quietly meet. When I was young, I learned to read more than books or prayers. I learned to read hesitation. A commander's pause, a nobleman's silence, a messenger arriving too late. These things could decide whether a house survived. Then came Kosovo, and with it my father's death. The field still carried dust, blood, and the weight of unfinished battle. Yet succession did not wait for morning. I became sultan before grief had time to settle. That is how power often arrives, not with music, but with urgency. In that moment, I understood something cruel. Rule does not begin when a crown is placed upon your head. Rule begins when you stop the cracks from widening. I did what later men would speak of again and again. I removed my brother Yakub. Some will call it murder. Some will call it the beginning of an Ottoman custom, hardened by necessity. To me in that hour, it was not a theory. It was a battlefield, a dead father, two princes and one state that could split apart. I will not ask you to forgive me. I only ask you to see the road beneath my feet. There was no clean path into power. There was only the path that remained after fear had narrowed all others. From that day forward, I had to show every lord, soldier, and rival that I could not be delayed. I had to move faster than rumor, faster than rebellion, faster than the doubts men whispered in their tents. Perhaps that was when they began to call me Yildirim, the Thunderbolt. Names are strange things. At first they are given by others. Then they begin to command the one who carries them. Once they called me Thunderbolt, I felt I had to become it every day. I pushed into the Balkans and I pushed into Anatolia. I fought Christian rulers and I fought Muslim beys. To outsiders it may look like simple conquest. But the world I inherited was not divided cleanly by faith, language, or custom. It was divided by fear and opportunity. Byzantium still held Constantinople, a wounded shadow of an ancient empire, but a shadow that still mattered. Serbian lords, Bulgarian lands, Hungarian power, Wallachian resistance, and Anatolian principalities all watched us carefully. They watched to see whether the Ottomans would continue forward, or whether our rise would finally slow. I believed I could not slow down. A young state that stops too early hears every buried question rise again from the earth. So I moved, and men mistook movement for certainty. I gathered vassals, demanded obedience, arranged power around my will, and made my name travel farther than my body. Victory teaches dangerous lessons. It teaches you that pressure works, that hesitation belongs to others. It teaches you that the next wall will fall because the last one trembled. Then came Nicopolis. The crusading army that came against me was not a band of raiders. It was Europe's confidence riding eastward in armor. French knights, Hungarian power, nobles, banners, and prayers gathered with the belief that my advance could be broken. They thought one great victory might push the Ottomans back and make the frontier breathe again. I knew the weight of that moment. If they defeated me, every hesitant enemy would awaken. If I defeated them, my name would no longer belong only to our lands. The field at Nicopolis became a test of pride against discipline. Their shining armor did not save them from confusion, and their courage did not make them understand the ground beneath them. I will not pretend the victory was gentle. Great victories rarely are. After Nicopolis, fear of me crossed farther borders. Some cursed my name, some studied it, some decided that standing against me was more dangerous than kneeling. That is the hidden gift of victory. It does not only defeat an army, it changes the calculations of everyone who was watching. But every victory placed another stone beneath my throne. The throne rose higher, and the wind around it grew colder. I began to believe I could complete what my fathers had only pressed toward. Constantinople stood before me like an old door between worlds. The city was weakened, surrounded by history, but still full of meaning. It was not merely stone, walls, churches, markets, and imperial memory. It was the last great symbol that said the old order had not vanished. I tightened my hand around it. I besieged it, pressured it, watched it endure, and waited for time to do what my armies had not yet done. Inside, the Byzantine emperor searched for aid. Outside, I believed patience served me. Perhaps that was my mistake, or perhaps it was only one of many. Power deceives a man by making silence look like surrender. It makes him mistake delay for destiny, and the enemy's fear for the enemy's end. While Constantinople resisted, Anatolia demanded my other hand. The Beyliks there were not empty spaces on a map. They were families, memories, rival claims, and men who remembered older freedoms. I subdued them because I believed the Ottomans could no longer remain one power among many. We had to become the power that decided the order of the region. But every bey I displaced, every household I humbled, every old loyalty I bent beneath my rule, did not truly disappear. They waited. Conquest can silence men without convincing them. I knew this in theory, perhaps, but knowledge is not the same as caution. My speed gathered lands faster than trust could root itself beneath them, and then from the east came the wind I had not mastered. Timur was not a minor lord on a troubled border. He was not a frightened neighbor who could be forced backward by threats or titles. He came carrying his own legend of conquest, his own memory of cities broken, his own empire of fear and calculation. Between us stood more than pride. We were two expanding worlds, each unwilling to admit that another man's ambition could set limits upon our own. The letters between us sharpened. Words can be weapons before armies move. Every insult was read not only by the receiver, but by all who watched. A sultan cannot appear weak before his vassals. A conqueror cannot allow another conqueror to place his name above his own. So the road narrowed. Men may later say I should have waited, negotiated, withdrawn, or chosen a more careful field. Later men always have the advantage of surviving the consequences. I heard warnings. I was not deaf, but I also heard Nicopolis, the Balkans, Anatolia, and the long habit of victory speaking louder. When a man has moved quickly for years, caution begins to feel like shame. Before Ankara, I was still the Thunderbolt. I had sons, commanders, cavalry, vassals, and the memory of enemies already defeated. I had shaken Europe's crusaders and pressed Byzantium toward desperation. Yet on that dry Anatolian ground, I faced not only Timur's army, I faced every weakness hidden beneath my speed. Battle reveals what ceremony conceals. The standards rise, drums sound, men shout, and for a moment a ruler can still believe the world obeys him. Then the first reports arrive uncertainly. Then a flank strains. Then men you counted on begin to remember old grievances. Timur understood the lands I had taken were not all loyal in the same way. He knew how to touch old wounds, how to invite the conquered to reconsider their obedience. He fought my army, yes, but he also fought the unfinished structure of my rule. That day the Thunderbolt slowed. War is not the clean picture that later painters make of it. Defeat is not one trumpet, one heroic cry, one beautiful collapse beneath a red sky. Defeat is orders lost in dust. It is a rider searching for a commander who has moved. It is a banner that should still be visible, but is not. It is men looking over their shoulders before anyone has admitted the battle is failing. I saw the line weaken. I saw loyalty become heavy. I saw the past return through men I had forced into the present too quickly. By the end, I was captured. There are few humiliations deeper for a ruler than surviving his own defeat. Death can be made noble by those who need stories. Captivity is harder to decorate. A man who once surrounded cities is led into another man's camp. A man whose name made kings anxious becomes proof of another man's greatness. Timur had defeated me, but captivity did something different. It made me live inside the sound of my own fall. Later, stories would grow around my imprisonment. Some would be exaggerated, some would be shaped by hatred, pity, or the hunger for a more dramatic ending. History has always enjoyed making cages smaller after a defeated man is already inside one. I will not claim to know which tale you were first told about me. I know only this: I lost my freedom. I know that my body, once carried by speed and command, could no longer decide where it would go. I know that messengers moved without my control, and that men waited to see what would become of the house of Osman. And I know that after I fell, my sons began to struggle for what remained. The land I had forced into one movement opened again into division. The period after me would become a time of fighting among my sons, a wound in the Ottoman story. That may be the hardest truth for me to hold. I had built power, but not yet enough stability. I had expanded the state, but expansion is not the same as settlement. I had made many obey, but obedience created by speed can break when speed is gone. The questions I had pressed down rose again. Which son would rule? Which lord would shift? Which old family would reclaim hope? Which enemy would breathe easier? I thought I was forging permanence. Perhaps I was only binding many unsettled things together with the force of my own will. When my will was captured, the binding loosened. This is the price of ruling through urgency. It wins days, battles, cities, and reputations, but it also teaches the realm to depend upon the ruler's motion, not upon deeper order. I do not say Timur alone defeated me. He defeated me on the field, yes, but I was also defeated by speed, by overreach, by unfinished loyalty. I was defeated by believing that what had been conquered had already been transformed. That is a mistake many rulers make. I only made it loudly. They will remember me for Nicopolis and Ankara. They will remember that I pressed Constantinople, but did not take it. They will remember the name Thunderbolt, and they will remember that the Thunderbolt was captured by another conqueror. Names become smaller in books than they were in life. A page can hold a battle without carrying the smell of horses, sweat, mud, fear, and hot iron. A sentence can say, I executed a brother, defeated crusaders, besieged a city, lost at Ankara, and died in captivity. But no sentence can make those things feel as they felt when each one still had no ending. I will not turn myself into an innocent man. I made brutal choices, and I knew they were brutal. I took lands from rulers who had names, fathers, sons, prayers, and memories of their own. I used fear because fear worked. I made speed a principle because delay could kill a dynasty in its cradle. And yet, fear does not love the hand that uses it. It serves while the hand is strong. It calculates when the hand is bound. There were people who needed me, and people who feared me, and often they were the same people. A ruler learns to accept that combination. He should also learn to fear it. I was useful to those who wanted order, victory, and protection. I was dangerous to those who wanted room to breathe. In my rise, I mistook usefulness for devotion. In my fall, I learned how quickly men separate the two. What did I truly want? It is easy to answer with empire, conquest, glory, Constantinople, obedience. Those answers are not false, but they are not complete. I wanted to secure what my father left bleeding on a battlefield. I wanted to make the Ottomans impossible to ignore. I wanted my enemies to understand that we were not a passing force on the frontier. I wanted the world to move around us, not over us. Perhaps that is why I could not endure the thought of Timur placing limits upon me. His challenge did not only threaten land, it threatened the story I had forced men to believe about my momentum. If I was the Thunderbolt, then I had to strike. If I hesitated, the name itself would turn against me. That is how power imprisons before enemies do. It gives you an image and then demands that you keep feeding it. I fed mine with campaigns, pressure, punishment, and victories. For a long time the image obeyed. Then Ankara broke it. After defeat, time changed its shape. Before, time had been a horse beneath me, something to drive forward. In captivity, time became a room. A day could stretch longer than a campaign. A night could hold more noise than a battlefield, because memory has no discipline. I remembered Kosovo. I remembered my father's absence more sharply than I had allowed myself to feel it then. I remembered Yakub, not as a political problem, but as a brother whose existence had become unbearable to the state I chose to protect. That is the cruelty of memory. It waits until power has left your hands before returning the human shape to those you treated as obstacles. I remembered Nicopolis too. Not only the victory, but the faces of men who believed courage would save them from misjudgment. At the time, I saw their pride as a weapon I could use against them. Later, I wondered how different their pride was from mine before Ankara. I remembered Constantinople most strangely. I had wanted its walls to fall, yet in captivity I understood something about walls. They do not only imprison, they preserve. That city endured me, as it had endured others by refusing to make my timetable its own. Perhaps it knew that the man outside its gates was racing not only against emperors, but against himself. I do not say this with tenderness. I still wanted the city, but wanting is not the same as possessing, and no ruler should confuse pressure with completion. The old city survived my siege. I did not survive the consequences of my speed. In the years after me, others would rebuild what my fall had broken. The Ottoman house would not end with my captivity. That fact may comfort some, but it does not undo what I saw beginning. Sons turned against sons. Claim met claim. The realm I had driven forward had to learn whether it could exist without the man called Thunderbolt. In a way, that was the question I had failed to answer while I lived. Could the power I built stand when I stopped moving? Could obedience become order? Could conquest become government? Could fear become loyalty? I had no more commands with which to answer. History later arranges all of this neatly. It says Bayezid rose quickly, ruled fiercely, defeated crusaders, besieged Constantinople, lost to Timur, and died after captivity. It places me between my father's achievements and my descendants' restoration. It gives me a place in a line. But no man lives as a line. I lived as pressure. Pressure from my father's death, from the frontier, from enemies who watched for weakness. Pressure from soldiers who needed victory, subjects who needed order, rivals who needed only one hesitation. Pressure from my own name, once it became larger than my body. That is what I wish you could hear beneath the thunder. Not innocence, not apology. Pressure. A ruler under pressure can become decisive. He can also become blind. I became both. When they speak of my cruelty, they are not always wrong. When they speak of my brilliance, they are not always wrong. When they speak of my fall, they often make it sound as if one battle explained everything. But no great fall begins only on the day it becomes visible. It begins in habits that once brought success. It begins in the victories that teach you the wrong lesson. It begins in the people who obey because they must, not because they believe. It begins when speed becomes identity. I did not see all of that clearly. Few men do while the banners are still rising. If I had moved slower, perhaps enemies would have gathered sooner. If I had moved faster, perhaps the cracks would have widened anyway. The dead and defeated are often asked to solve history after it has already consumed them. I cannot solve it. I can only tell you how it felt. It felt like holding a blade by its sharp edge and calling the blood proof of strength. It felt like standing above kings one year and beneath another conqueror's judgment the next. It felt like discovering that the world can fear you without being yours, and at the end, it felt very quiet. Not peaceful. Quiet there is a difference. Peace is when the heart has accepted what the world has done. Quiet is when there is no longer anyone nearby who must obey your voice. A captured ruler still has memories of command, but memories do not open doors. They do not summon armies. They do not make sons stop reaching for inheritance. They do not turn defeat back into warning. They only sit with you. Mine sat close. I remembered the weight of armor, the impatience of horses, the smell of rain on leather. I remembered messengers kneeling, maps unfolding, men lowering their eyes because my decision would decide their road. I remembered the faces of those who feared disappointing me. I remembered too late that fear is a poor foundation for remembrance. What does a man leave behind when his speed has ended? A name, yes. A wound, certainly. A warning, perhaps? I leave behind the story of a ruler who expanded the Ottoman world with ferocious energy, then showed how dangerous expansion becomes when it outruns its roots. I leave behind victories that made me feared and a defeat that made me human. I leave behind the lesson I never intended to teach. Even thunder depends on the sky that carries it. When the sky breaks, thunder becomes only noise. I do not ask you to soften me. Do not make me a victim simply because I ended in captivity. Do not forget the men who suffered beneath my ambition. Do not remove the blood from the road and call it destiny. But do not make me only a cautionary shadow either. I was a son, a brother, a commander, a sultan, a conqueror, a prisoner. I was the man who tried to make a young power move so quickly that no enemy could catch it, and I was caught. That is the part history enjoys, because it completes the shape. The thunderbolt captured, the fast man stopped, the conqueror conquered. There is justice in that shape, perhaps. There is also simplification. A life is not made only to satisfy the symmetry of later readers. I did not live as a symbol. I lived inside choices that narrowed as soon as they appeared. I lived inside rooms where mercy looked like weakness and hesitation looked like invitation. I lived in a world where a ruler who failed to frighten others might soon be buried by them. If that world made me hard, I accepted the hardness. If that hardness helped break me, I must accept that too. The last truth is not glorious. At the end, the throne was elsewhere. The armies were elsewhere. The sons were already becoming rivals. Constantinople still stood. Timur still had the field. And I had only the shrinking kingdom of my own thoughts. Men imagine that a fallen ruler thinks only of lost power. Sometimes he does. But sometimes he thinks of a door closing, a brother's name, a father's body after battle, a city wall in the distance. Sometimes he thinks of all the moments when he believed there would be more time. I had lived as if time could be forced to move at my pace. In the end, time did not even turn its face toward me. It continued without asking whether Bayezid still commanded. That may be the deepest humiliation of all. The world goes on after the man who believed he was driving it. So when you hear my name, hear both parts. Hear the thunder that crossed battlefields and frightened kings. Hear also the silence after Ankara. When the sound had nowhere left to go, I do not ask for pardon. Thunder does not ask the burned tree to forgive it. I ask only that you understand the cost of becoming the name others gave me. They called me the Thunderbolt because I moved quickly. They forgot that lightning is visible only for a moment. Then the dark returns. My victories were bright, violent, and impossible to ignore. My fall lasted longer, and in that longer darkness, I learned what speed had hidden from me. A kingdom is not held by motion alone. A throne is not secured by fear alone. A name is not the same as a soul. When the books close over me, they may leave you with dates and battles. Kosovo, Nicopolis, Constantinople, Ankara, they may leave you with Timur, with captivity, with sons fighting over the broken inheritance. But I lived between those words. I lived in the breath before an order, in the silence after a death, in the dust before a charge. I lived in the terrible belief that if I slowed down, everything would collapse. Perhaps I was wrong, perhaps I was right, and it collapsed because even my speed was not enough. That is the question I carry into silence. Not whether I was great, not whether I was cruel, not whether Timur was stronger, but whether the world I tried to build could ever have been built at the pace I demanded. I will never know. The dead do not receive revisions. The defeated do not command the next chapter. History will use the name it prefers. Bayezid the Thunderbolt, Bayezid the Defeated, Bayezid the Captive. All of them are true, and none of them are enough. I was not only the thunder, I was the man who heard it fade.